All right. Thank you. So Terry, now it's all about swimming, unless
Now
you'd
we
like
can
to chat
hog
about
we can
running.
hog the spotlight.
We can hog the bandwidth. So we do have some swimming specific questions for you. Let me scroll through real quick. Um, let's see. From Richard. I'm curious as to how the glide improves efficiency during swimming. How long are you suggesting to hold a glide for, and what position are you suggesting the swimmer be in during the initial catch phase of the stroke?
All right, so I think it's really important to be careful about how you use the word glide, and we try to be very careful about it. I don't like to use the word glide. In my mind, the only place you would glide is on the push-off coming from the wall. Once you begin stroking, you should never be gliding. All right, so let's define what turns a stroke into a glide. If your hand stops at your hip, you're gliding. If your
Mm-hmm.
hand does not stop at your hip and continues directly into the recovery, you are swimming. You're not gliding. And on the other hand, there's a pretty advanced skill that we refer to as the patient lead hand, and the reason it's an advanced skill is it's what's called asynchronous timing. So
Mm-hmm.
one hand is pausing and taking its time while the other hand keeps moving. And it's not easy to learn. But it's important to devote time to learning that, because having a patient lead hand, as opposed to rushing the catch or starting the stroke prematurely, all
Mm-hmm.
right, brings some really critical benefits. So the first of those benefits is that you spend a tiny fraction of a second in a slightly longer position in the water. In other words, I'm 6 feet tall, but I can be maybe 8.5 feet long in the water when I'm fully extended. All
Mm-hmm.
right, and I spend a fraction of a second longer in that 8.5 foot vessel position if my hand is patient. Not so long that I get a hitch, right? I don't want to have discontinuity in my stroke, but
Right.
I want to add a tiny fraction of a second during the non-propulsive phase. All right, I'm not creating propulsion at that moment, so the main thing I have to do is conserve the momentum I already created. All right, so that's benefit number one, is you're more streamlined during that tiny fraction of a second. The second is that by being patient with that lead hand, then you initiate the stroke at the same time as you start your body rotation, and that means the work of the next stroke is going to be performed primarily by weight shift and by your core, and not
Mm-hmm.
by your arm. And then finally, that again, it's a tiny fraction of a second that you're patient for with that lead hand. It allows the water behind your hand to calm down a little bit, to quiet down after having been disturbed on entry.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you have a firmer grip and you travel forward rather than move your hand back. Um,
Okay.
so it's not a glide. It's swimming with a stroke that allows you to be efficient.
Mm-hmm. I want to just point out one thing, and again, draw some ties between what Bobby was talking about with those reflexes while running and what you're talking about, Terry. You say when the hand pauses at the hip, or if you have a hitch in your stroke, that's gliding. But if the
Correct.
arm is recovering, it's not gliding. I'm going to back away from my camera here just a little bit to see if I can do a little demonstration.
Great.
All right. So I can barely see myself here. If one arm is moving forward, the reflex that Bobby's talking about, that crossed extensor reflex, means that when one limb extends, the other arm retracts, or vice versa. In the case of running, if you were to step on a tack and that foot were to lift up very quickly, the reflex is the opposite foot goes down so that you don't fall over. So it allows for alternating movements. In swimming, if that lead arm reaches out, and if you're nice and long and you've got that 8.5 foot height there as a 6 foot person, the spinal cord reflex is that the recovery arm goes back. And this is how people get stuck. If they're focusing so much about reaching forward that they forget about what the recovery arm should be doing, they get stuck here, and then there's a pause, and then they remember, and then both switch and they get stuck on the other side.
Right.
So when you say asynchronous movement, what's happening is that this arm is extended outward while the recovery arm is smoothly recovering forward, and then you use the weight to shift. I think that's a really neat comparison between what Bobby was describing in his alternating running movements and what we're talking about here, both with the glide, not having a hitch, smooth recovery, and tying it all into the liability of the recovery arm causing instability.
And if I can mention one more thing, when you talk about getting stuck, another thing besides that innate reflex that you talked about, another thing that contributes to getting stuck is advice that you may hear that you should push all the way back, that you should accelerate the hand, that you should push past the hip. All of those things will contribute to your getting stuck in the rear. And rather than smoothly transferring the momentum from your prior weight shift, so I'm going to move away from the computer as well. All right, and see if I can do a little demonstration here.
Okay. This is Terry's dryland swimming demonstration.
All right. So as I come through the rear of the stroke, can you see my arm, Suzanne?
Mm-hmm.
As I come through the rear of the stroke, what I'd like to have is that energy that's going through the rear immediately transfer forward. All right, so that's why it's, the way in which you release the water and immediately redirect the momentum and energy from that stroke forward is a pretty critical part of your efficiency. The capturing and redirection of energy rather than dissipating it at the back end.
That's great, and that takes a little while for someone to start sensing and feeling rather than just mechanically following a step of drills, but starting to tune into what it feels like to actually be moving through the water and feeling the efforts, any movements that you're making to be translated into forward motion.
Right.